I'm Gavin Blair, a freelance journalist from the UK. Today I'm going to talk about Brexit, Britain's decision to leave the European Union. To start with, I'm going to talk about the results of the referendum in June 2016. This followed a long campaign, a long and bitter campaign, with very strong opinions expressed on both sides, that really divided a country as had rarely been seen before in the UK. It split the country on various lines, and people were genuinely angry. However, it was widely believed, certainly amongst the political establishment and the media, that the result was almost a foregone conclusion, that Britain would certainly vote to stay within the European Union, of which it had been a member for more than 40 years. But when the time came and the results came in on June 2016, in fact, Leave won. It was close. 51.9% of the population voted to leave, of the people who voted, and 48.1% voted to stay. So very close. The turnout was over 72%, 72.2% to be precise, which is considerably higher than the turnout in general elections in recent years. This high turnout certainly speaks to the passion and how strongly people felt about this. There was shock at the results, certainly. Even among those who had voted to leave, some apparently didn't actually think Britain was really going to leave. I hadn't really thought through the consequences of their actions. This really requires some explanation. Why indeed in such an important vote would people vote for something they didn't think was going to happen and perhaps didn't even want to happen? I think one of the major reasons for this was disaffection, unhappiness with the status quo, with the way things were in the country. People were unhappy, they were angry, and they wanted to express that. And one way to express that was to upset the political establishment, who believed that we were going to stay in the EU. There are parallels here, I think, between what happened with Brexit and with the election of President Donald Trump in the United States, which happened fairly shortly afterwards. There are a number of similarities that can be pointed to between the two, both in the causes and the way things turned out. There is disaffection with inequality. The gap between the rich and the poor is undoubtedly growing. People are unhappy and looking for somebody to blame for that. Globalization is one of the things that is blamed, and with some justification. Many manufacturing jobs, well-paid jobs, have moved, of course, to overseas, though many more have been replaced, in fact, by automation. In both the UK and the US, there is definitely a disaffected white working class. People who feel they've been left behind. People who once had good standards of living and who have suffered as things have changed. And those people are perhaps inclined or easily persuaded to blame outsiders, immigrants, for their troubles. Many of these people also feel that they lacked representation. The traditional political parties who supported and represented these people, which would in the UK be the Labour Party, in the US be the Democrats, many white working class people felt that those parties no longer represented them. It was also interesting that there was a failure really in polling, in political polling in both cases. In the polls leading up to Brexit, the Remainers were found to be ahead, in the same way that in America, Hillary Clinton was shown to be ahead in the polls right up until polling day. There was a similar margin of error. Both of them got it wrong. And this can partially be explained by perhaps people being embarrassed or not telling pollsters the truth when they were asked, because of perhaps derision, criticism in the media. In the US against people who were supporting Trump, and in the UK people who were supporting Leave. This fed into this idea that there was a liberal elite that didn't understand ordinary people. So following the results of the referendum, the Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, who had called the referendum after having promised it in the previous general election and was himself a Remainer, resigned. He felt his position was, as they say, untenable. He was then replaced by Theresa May. Interesting, she too was originally a Remainer. She had campaigned, though not particularly passionately, to remain. However, she took over a Conservative Party government that was now committed to leaving the Union, to follow the wishes of the referendum. So she now had to deliver Brexit. So, in February 2017, they triggered what is known as Article 50 of the Treaty of the European Union, which is the clause that must be triggered when a country plans to leave. That was triggered, passed through Parliament, and a letter was sent to the European Union in March of 2017 declaring Britain's intention to leave. Having taken power, Theresa May had stated on a number of occasions that she wouldn't call a general election. She then did call what is known as a snap election, and in June of 2017 she had an election to perhaps consolidate her position, her power. That was her intention. This somewhat backfired. She turned out to be a relatively poor campaigner. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, who had been derided and criticised in the media, was a surprisingly good campaigner, ran a surprisingly effective campaign, tapped into people's concerns, and the Conservative Party government ended up losing its majority rather than expanding it as it had planned. Having lost its majority, it was then forced to call on a minor party from Northern Ireland, known as the Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP, which can only really be described as a small, religious, fanatic party. To ensure their support, Theresa May promised them £1 billion in spending for Northern Ireland, increased spending, which was really widely described as a kind of bribe to guarantee their support. Then began 17 months of negotiations with the EU on the terms of Britain's withdrawal. This is, of course, incredibly complex. It covers so many laws and regulations, trade, copyright, health and safety. There appeared to be unfounded optimism and complacency among the British government. They really appeared not to understand how difficult this was going to be. The International Trade Secretary at the time, Liam Fox, became famous for saying that the deal which Britain had to negotiate with the EU should be one of the easiest in human history. It was clear that the EU was never going to make it easy for Britain to leave. Anyone who's studied strategy or has even a basic knowledge of game theory should have been able to work out that it was not in the EU's interests to give Britain a good deal. If they did indeed make it easy for Britain and give them favourable terms, then that would only encourage other countries that were thinking of leaving to leave. Of course, if you join a club, you get benefits. If you leave that club, you lose the benefits. That's simply the way the world works. Britain will now be left in the position of having to renegotiate a deal, not only with Europe, but with the rest of the world, including, of course, Japan. Europe recently concluded a EPA, a European Economic Partnership Agreement, with Japan. Once Britain leaves the EU, it will then have to renegotiate that individually with Japan, as it will have to do with many other countries around the world.